do you come up with ideas for your adventure plots? I love discussing that with other DMs because the answers are always so different. And I have the feeling that most DMs don't have the chance to talk much about that. Before creating your D&D adventure, consider asking these 6 questions. Do you find it a funny way to create adventures? Or does it resemble yours? There's a fascinating interview with George R.R. Martin telling how he came up with his initial idea for the Game of Thrones book way back in 1991. A well-rounded plot idea is a great start, but it's certainly not enough. Once I'm confident I've nailed that down, there are 5 steps I take to turn a simple plot idea into a remarkable adventure. It forces me to remember that whatever the quest the players are facing, it will get much deeper when it ceases to be an abstract issue and becomes a first-person tale of how things have derailed to someone with whom the players can empathize. Hello and welcome to the Deep Dice Press. We are a bunch of friends in their 30s who have played D&D since our teen years and love role-playing and storytelling. On a given day, it just so happened that we were all going through career transitions and thought, why not give a shot at developing D&D products? And that's how our indie D&D publisher was born, small in size but big in aspirations. Our purpose is to take your D&D adventures to the magical excitement and deep immersion we experience with the epic tales and narratives of humankind. If you think our number of followers does not reflect our content quality, say the mystic words and perform the necessary gestures to hit the like, subscribe, and bell buttons with 3 glowing darts. It's simple, you don't even need to roll for an attack. You can also use a mage hand to grab the links for our social media in the description down below. I got sick of creating my adventures thinking first about the big bad evil guy. My problem with starting my stories with villains or antagonists was that it was limiting my imagination and leading to adventures that were feeling just too mechanical and repetitive for me. But then, when I tried to start from other places, my creative process would often become wild, confusing, and time-demanding. I felt the need to organize myself and have a clear approach. I decided to effectively segregate what I found to be 2 very distinct stages, the plot idea and the plot development. Once those 2 stages were well-rounded, I managed to turn them much more easily into remarkable adventures with engaging storytelling. So these were the 2 things I learned the hard way to create exciting D&D stories. 1. Before creating your D&D adventure, consider asking these 6 questions which will help you first think about thrilling situations to involve your players. I realized that I would often come with much more enthralling villains and exciting adventures after I had nailed down my plot by answering those 6 straightforward questions. 2. The 5 steps I take to turn a simple plot idea into a remarkable adventure. Conceive relatable victims, create credible villains, establish strong motivations, invest in the plot development, and design the adventure outline. Using those approaches made my adventures more original and my creative process easier, and I think they might have a lot of cool and helpful ideas for you too. So join us, won't you? Let's start from the beginning. Before creating your D&D adventure, consider asking these 6 questions. Why is this even an adventure? Who are the adventure's critical NPCs? Where is the adventure's location? What objects are important for this adventure? When do the critical events take place, and what are their triggers? How do the adventure's crucial encounters unfold? The good old 5 W's and 1 H questions made it much easier for me to create my adventures. Let me show you why. How do you come up with ideas for your adventure plots? I love discussing that with other DMs because the answers are always so different. And I have the feeling that most DMs don't have the chance to talk much about that. After all, we mainly talk about D&D with players from our groups. I think that thrilling plots are the key factor that makes players engaged and excited about adventures. That's why it's so important to get them right. But unfortunately, they're also probably the most creative aspect of an adventure, and sometimes it can be pretty hard to imagine and develop original plots. Before I start writing my adventures, I make sure my plot is well established, and for that, I answer the 5 W's and 1 H question. So, I thought it would be interesting to share my approach step by step to devise and develop my adventure plots, and gather some of your answers for that as well. There's a fascinating interview with George R.R. Martin telling how he came up with his initial idea for the Game of Thrones book way back in 1991. At that point, he was mostly scripting for movies and series. A summer break allowed him to get back to his writing. Back then, he was better known as the creator and editor of Wild Cards, a science fiction and superhero anthology. Out of the blue, this scene, which had nothing to do with his science fiction writing, pops into his head. 6 kids of the ruling family of a cold northern kingdom are coming back from witnessing the beheading of a deserter and find 6 dire wolf pups in the summer snow. He feels compelled to sit down and write it.
Lord Stark, there are 5 pups. 1 for each of the Stark children. The direwolf is a sigil of your house. You were meant to have them.
You'll train them yourselves. You'll feed them yourselves. And if they die, you'll bury them yourselves.
What about you?
I'm not a Stark. Get on. What is it?
Run to the litter. That one's yours, Snow.
That scene would become the first chapter of the Song of Ice and Fire series. Thousands of pages of the story that would become the landmark of contemporary fantasy, as well as the sophisticated history, geography, and politics of Westeros, would emerge from that simple scene with Arya, Sansa, Robb, Bran, and Rickon Stark, as well as Jon Snow. Not from a whiteboard filled with schematics of noble houses, conspiracies, characters, maps and plots, but from that particular scene with no other associated contents. It's mind-blowing how story ideas can be born and how big and intricate they can get. I've always found the undead creatures' backstories in D&D one of the most exciting. They all have this element of unsettled matters and tragedy that makes them compelling NPCs. Seriously, have you ever had a look into them? Banshees, Death Knights, ghosts, specters, poltergeists, wights, wraiths. They're all full of resentment and regret, which are notorious motivations for NPCs. They make tragic villains and anti-heroes who have fallen from grace. I was trying to dissect the exact step-by-step that took me to develop the multiple plots of a recent adventure. I can trace its genealogy to my fascination for those undead characters and their unfinished business with the living. I thought of a revenant who wanted to revenge the violent murder of himself and his sister. But I thought of a slight twist. Instead of a villain opposite to the characters, he would be the victim of a crime they were investigating. That's where it all began. Then I thought it would be cool if he used his own crypt as a hideout. And if he was going to have his own crypt, that meant he needed to be from an affluent family, a merchant. That made me immediately think of an exciting encounter for the adventure. The characters would be looking for something in his crypt and be stunned by the presence of what was left of the man whose death they were investigating. What would the characters would be looking for to make this encounter happen? I wanted it to be an object, but I also wanted to avoid the usual tropes of a treasure or a magic item. I wanted that object to actively contribute to the storytelling, and I wanted it to have a compelling name that made the players curious to find it. The Diaries of Rosario Ortega. The recollections of the Revenant's deceased sister would contain essential clues to help the players reach the adventure goals. I also always try to make sure my adventures are very similar. In other words, I want them to feel real for my players. I try to apply rigorous logic for that. I was uncomfortable with adventurers running around the city doing a job that the local militia should be responsible for, and I felt I needed a good answer for that. The city marshal, who was a remarkably honorable character, was suspicious that his officers were trying to cover up the crime for some reason. So he felt he had no alternative but to involve adventurers he trusted to conduct a parallel investigation. That also gave me one of the adventure villains, a corrupt officer who was somehow involved with the crime. There were still other elements to develop. I felt the corrupt officer shouldn't be the one who killed the Revenant's family. Instead, there should be some sort of conspiracy. I still needed another villain, the one who effectively made the killing. I also needed a motivation for the crime, a reason for the corrupt officer to cover it up, and what profits he would have with it. But you see where that's going? I started from an existing D&D lore that I wanted to develop, the Revenant. I decided he would not be a villain, but a victim. That led me to create his motivations, revenge, and an initial plot, the murder of his family. Next, I needed to set him on a location and made his own crypt his lair. That started me with an encounter, the players finding out about him while investigating the tomb. The players would need a reason to go to the crypt, which made me create the Diaries of Rosario Ortega. When I thought about how to justify that the players would be the ones investigating this crime instead of the local militia, I came up with one of the adventure villains, a corrupt officer. My initial idea for an NPC had already developed into many plot points, which gave me other questions to answer so that everything would make sense. That's usually how I start creating my adventures. Only after developing its plots do I begin to think of what will be the encounters, how they will be linked, and the overall adventure structure. Do you find it a funny way to create adventures? Or does it resemble yours? Come on, don't save your secret ingredients for yourself, share them in the comments. The truth is, I could have reached a very similar plot structure if I had started from any other point. For example, I could have thought first of the encounter in the crypt or of the corrupt officer trying to cover the murder and develop the same other elements from those points. But when I boil it all down, that structure goes back to the good old 5 Ws and 1 age approach. Wanna see? Who or NPCs are the adventure's villains, patrons, or victims? Where or location is its environment and its crucial areas? The Revenant's crypt in my story. What or object is anything the characters might be searching for? Rosario's journals, in my case. Why or event is whatever happened that set the adventure in motion. In my case, the murder of the Revenant's family is the critical event. How or encounter is an important scene, the players meeting the Revenant. A plot could easily originate from a when or time. Wouldn't it be cool if this or that happened in the middle of the adventure? I can easily see myself developing an entire plot starting from something like that. I have a file where I write down any cool ideas that pop into my mind that I could fit into an adventure. I have learned that, just like what happened with George R.R. Martin, sometimes a tiny spark can start a wildfire. So when I'm about to create a new adventure, I get back to that file to see what's in my storage room of ideas and if there's anything interesting lying around. Then I start to tinker with one of those ideas and try to fill the remaining W's and H's I need to build a plot. Not rarely do I get surprised by where that takes me. But what I love the most is seeing the results in our game table. Players engaged and excited with our D&D adventures. A well-rounded plot idea is a great start, but it's certainly not enough. Once I'm confident I've nailed that down, there are 5 steps I take to turn a simple plot idea into a remarkable adventure. Winning was easy, young man. Governing's harder. That's the sentence President George Washington spurs at Alexander Hamilton in the musical that takes his name. It's a great phrase and shows how easier it is to deal with a big, straightforward issue, in that case the War of Independence, than concerting several small and sometimes divergent matters. Well, every time I'm proud of myself because of my brilliant plot idea, Washington pops out by my side to remind me that the more complex work is yet ahead. After struggling with the writing of dozens of adventures, I established 5 steps I take to turn a simple plot idea into a remarkable adventure. 1. Conceive relatable victims. 2. Create credible villains. 3. Establish strong motivations. 4. Invest in the plot development. And 5. Design the adventure outline. You might think it's strange to start with victims, or even question whether every adventure should have victims at all. The truth is, there's a lot of iteration among those steps. I usually start from whichever one is easier for me to start, and when I think I'm ready, I move to the next easiest one. Then, when I develop one of those steps, I often come up with new ideas that make me go back to steps I had already worked on to add or adjust information. So, those 5 steps certainly don't have a chronological order. But should every adventure have victims? After all, sometimes adventures don't even have a villain, instead antagonists, NPCs that are not necessarily evil, but they are struggling for power or divergent goals. Even so, power struggles, such as a war, a revolution, or a political intrigue, very commonly create collateral damage for people that may have either high stakes or little to do with the established conflict. Regardless of a villainous threat or unintentional harm, it is in the moment that players are in touch with NPCs that can share the danger, the fear, or the pain that they are suffering that an emotional connection is established with the adventure. That's why I like to have relatable victims as a step 1. It forces me to remember that whatever the quest the players are facing, it will get much deeper when it ceases to be an abstract issue and becomes a first-person tale of how things have derailed to someone with whom the players can empathize. So yes, I try very hard that every adventure of mine has victims. The plot I had imagined for a recent adventure was the investigation of the violent murder of the 3 Ortega siblings, merchants that the citizens of Arabelle much liked. The plot itself already established for me, step 1, relatable victims. I thought of 2 plot twists to surprise my players and allow them to interact with the victims throughout the adventure. First, the older brother had become a revenant at the moment of his death, taken by the desire for revenge against the murderers of his family. Unbeknownst to him, his younger sister had survived the murder attempt. She was a natural-born werewolf, and the stress of the situation made her transform for the first time and escape. She was now roaming the city streets astray at night, taken by her wolf self. That would allow players not only to interact with her during the adventure, but also offer them a redemptive resolution for the adventure. They were not only hunting down the murderers, but they still had a chance to save one of the victims. The she-wolf subplot, by the way, was something I had not initially devised for the adventure, and instead something that I had taken from one of the player characters' backstories, which allowed me to enrich my story. I talked about the advantages of working with multiple plots and connecting character backstories to the adventure in another video you can watch by clicking on the screen. Somewhere here. But the truth is, when I created this plot idea, I had no idea who would be the murderer. So it was time to start the hard work and move to step 2, create credible villains. As it was a mystery adventure, I wanted the killer to be someone unsuspected, someone close to the victim, someone who would not have committed a capital crime in normal circumstances but would be resentful enough to perpetrate a violent betrayal if he felt threatened. The killer should be someone that the Ortegas trusted dearly. I decided that my villain would be the trade master of the Ortega merchant house, someone who had been working with the family for 20 years. I liked that choice, a three-dimensional villain who felt himself pushed into violence rather than someone evil by nature. Plus, his proximity to the Ortega family would allow my players to have a social encounter to get to know him, unaware they were interacting with the actual villain of the story. But I felt that that character wouldn't do it alone. He would hire the services of a necromancer to do the dirty work, which was another plot point that came out of one of my players' backstories. There, two villains then. Next, I needed to work on step 3 and establish solid motivations for the crime. What would push a quiet trade master to that sort of brutality? First and foremost, a massive dose of resentment. I decided that the Ortega siblings had inherited their merchant house. Despite owning the majority of the business, they were very distant from the daily operations. The trade master, despite of owning a small share of the merchant house, was the one doing most of the work for 2 decades, feeling himself unrecognized by the family and wronged by the circumstances. But his resentment wouldn't be enough to outpour into violence. I needed a push, something that would make him feel threatened enough to change his grudge into rage. So I decided to add a tragic element to the older Ortega brother, the Revenant. He had lost himself in drinking, gambling, and cheap pleasures. He was greatly indebted and told his trade master that he would bleed his family merchant house to pay his debts. There, all those years working day and night to make this business succeed, earning but a fraction of what he felt he deserved, and all that for a spoiled brat to ruin his future? That's the strong motivation that I needed. My time invested in working well steps 1 to 3, victims, villains, and motivations, would pay off, making step 4, plot development, easy for me. Most pieces were already laid down, and I could easily articulate how the events unfolded. The older Ortega brother was in debt, and his choices put his family's merchant house at risk. His resentful trade master owned part of the business and felt his future threatened by that. That pushed him to violence, and he hired a necromancer to make the kill. Not everything went as planned, however. The younger sister, unbeknownst to the villains, was a natural-born werewolf, and shape-shifted at the night of the crime and ran astray. The older brother, consumed by revenge, turned into a revenant at the moment of his death and sought the necromancer and the trade master for retribution. That's where my players would jump in, right in the middle of that mess. This takes us to our last step. I had already taken my cool plot idea and worked it out into an exciting story, but step 5, designing the adventure outline, is vital to taking this intriguing story and land it as an exciting adventure. This step is everything that the players will actually interact with, and through that, uncover the adventure story. Even more important than that, I need to lay out the pieces that will help lead my players to that story resolution and ensure that all that is immersive and fun for them. There's an additional plot point that I had created for this story that would help me to build an exciting adventure outline: the Diaries of Rosario Ortega, the middle sister of the assassinated family. She kept 3 volumes of her journals that would reveal essential story points, such as the secret lycanthropy of her younger sister and her older brother's fall from grace. As they held somber family secrets, Rosario carefully hid her diary's volumes in different locations. My adventure outline started with an encounter that would present my players with the violent murder of the Ortega siblings and task them with its investigation. They would also have access to Rosario's will, revealing the diary's existence to them. That first encounter would unlock a few subsequent encounters where the players could start their investigation. They could visit the Ortega Manor, where the family was killed, they could talk to former manor servants, and they could talk to the city priest, who had cast a Speak with Dead spell to collect the victim's testimony. It also wouldn't take long for the players to hear the rumors that a werewolf was running loose in town. Once they visited the Ortega Manor, they would find strange claw marks that hinted the werewolf was somehow related to that crime. They would also confront undead shadows in the manor, tasked by the necromancer to search for Rosario's journal. That would also be the first clue of the necromancer's involvement with the killing. There, they would also find the first volume of Rosario's journals. The former servants would mention the older Ortega brothers' downfall and the family's relationship with their trade master, leading them to that encounter. As for the high priest, some odd reports would be collected from the dead victims, leading the players to the family mausoleum. There, they would meet the revenant, who was already on the hunt for the necromancer who had killed his family. Somewhere along the way, they should also start their hunt for the werewolf. As you can see, having the idea is easy. Developing a remarkable adventure is harder. But with practice, I learned that those were the 5 steps I should keep in mind to accomplish that. Relatable victims, credible villains, strong motivations, plot development, and adventure outline. I understood that the best step to start from is the one that seems easier to me, and that I should feel free to go back and forth between all of them. Once I go through those 5 steps, I get confident that my plot is ready to be transformed into immersive encounters that involve my players in an exciting story as they overcome the challenges I have prepared for them. We talked about a lot of things, so let's try to wrap it up. Where do your ideas for D&D adventures come from? Maybe even more importantly, how do you develop the idea for a plot in order to transform them into engaging and exciting adventures? Before I start to think about things such as an adventure outline or structure, I always try to have interesting plots on my hands and develop them into a story that will involve and captivate my players. In order to make things easier for myself, I like to treat those 2 initial stages separately, the plot idea and the plot development. I rely on simple but specific approaches to guide myself through each of those stages. 6 questions to ask yourself in order to create thrilling D&D adventure plots. Why is this even an adventure, or what events set it in motion? Who are the adventure's critical NPCs, villains, patrons, and victims? Where is the adventure's location? Which environment is it set in, and what are its critical encounter areas? When do the critical events take place, and what are their triggers? What are the key objects the characters will find, especially the ones that support the story's development? How do the adventure's crucial encounters unfold? I use these straightforward 5 W's and 1 H questions to create my plots. An initial idea answers any one of them. Then I tinker with it to answer the remaining questions in no particular order. Only after that do I think about encounters, their connections, and the adventure structure. Why? Because for me, a well-established thrilling plot is what truly makes players engaged and excited about a D&D adventure. 5 things to pay close attention to when turning your D&D plot into a remarkable adventure. Conceive relatable victims. Only when players are in touch with NPCs sharing the danger, the fear, and the pain caused by villains can they truly establish an emotional connection with the adventure. Relatable victims turn an abstract quest into a first-person tale players can empathize with. Create credible villains. 3-dimensional antagonists who felt pushed into depictable acts feel much more real and threatening than evil for evil's sake. Establish strong motivations. Resentment, narcissism, selfishness, and blind ideology are stronger motivations than taking over the world. Invest in the plot development. What has already happened, when do the players jump in, and what will unfold along the adventure. Design the adventure outline. Only then it's time to transform your plot into remarkable encounters. Remember, it's through their interaction with the adventure that players will uncover an exciting story. They're 2 different things, but one needs the other. That's why I make sure that I first have a clear plot idea and that I have done proper work on my plot development. With exciting storytelling in my hands, I find it much easier to design a remarkable adventure that will engage and excite my D&D players. If you're interested in the content of this video and want to know more about it, click on the link in the description below to download for free our booklet Make Your Character Matter. You can also find more related content on our social networks. All links are available in the description below. If you want to check out a module where we apply all concepts discussed in this channel, look out for our new campaign, The Kingdom of Cormyr, One Purple Raven, available this year. Clicking on the screen, you may find more videos on creating exciting D&D adventures and characters. If you think our content might be interesting for you, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell to receive notifications for new content. This video makes part of our series on how to create great D&D campaigns. In this series, we discuss what we believe to be the core elements of an outstanding D&D campaign for players who enjoy role-playing and storytelling, great characters and great stories. In the Great Characters videos, we talk about the importance of backstories, allies, bringing the party together, and how to connect all of that into outstanding D&D campaigns. In the Great Stories videos, we discuss topics such as building up tension and suspense, plot lines, plot twists, villains and patrons, as well as advanced storytelling techniques. And yet, the best way to create great adventures is to get inspiration from great ideas. So be sure to share your great ideas and experiences in the comments down below. How do you come up with ideas for your adventure plots? I'm sure your experience will inspire not only us, but many others. Thank you for sharing this time with us. We are the Deep Dice Press.